welcome to another episode of the Business is Mission podcast. I'm here with I call him a new old friend. We just met a little while back, maybe a couple of months ago, but I feel like I've known him for a long time. He thinks like me, which means he is an incredibly intelligent and educated man. So anyway, welcome Matt Hangen from Water4. His organization is Water4, the number 4.org. All this contact information will be in the show notes. But Matt, welcome to the show, first of all.
Yeah, glad to be here, Mike.
So, Matt, when we first got connected and we chatted, we have a lot in common, biblically, missiologically, our view of business, even our view of economies and economic systems. So we could go on forever. We'll try not to, but I really enjoyed it. And I know right off the bat, we said, okay, I got to get you on the podcast to tell your story. So I'm going to just start running with it and letting you go. Give us a little bit of backstory on how you met the Lord and how you ended up in Africa, which is where Water4 is primarily focused, at least at the current time. I could see it going other places, but just a little bit of your backstory.
Yeah, appreciate it. I think the short answer to that is knucklehead kid from very, very rural Alabama. And managed to get myself kicked out of the public school system when I was in 7th grade. I was 12, and my grandfather passed away and left a little life insurance policy that enabled my parents to put me in a Christian private school. It was my first time around believers, my first time around really. It was a big, big shift in culture from where I lived and people that lived around me to, this school, different families. And the Lord used that for about 5 years, I think, to kind of soften up the edges of my knuckleheadedness. And then my senior year of high school, I was on a lawnmower and I heard a voice say, "You don't have to hurt or hurt others anymore." Shut off the lawnmower. Heard the same voice again. And then the context to who I was, that was like the most outside of me thought that God could have introduced into me. And it's been a lifetime of unraveling that. But my response in the moment was to drive to the church where one of the Bible teachers taught from this high school. And I showed up coming up the steps and he says, "Matt, what are you doing here?" And I'd grown up with sort of a defense of like the Bible was a book for man, by man. He's for soft, weak people. I wasn't going to be one of those, it was going to be tough and self-reliant. And so I show up and spend 40 minutes in that youth minister's office, kind of explaining to this Church of Christ guy that God just spoke to me, which at the time I didn't know wasn't exactly inside the wheelhouse of this youth minister. But I got baptized that night for 500 strangers, placed my faith in Jesus, and was handed my first Bible, which I devoured over Christmas break. And suddenly saw myself and all my story in light of all these other people's stories that were in the Bible, other misfits and mess ups and people that God was taking and redeeming.
So you weren't the first knucklehead that God ever grabbed a hold of.
Yeah. And I read, when I, read Paul's story on the road to Damascus, I was like, he hears a voice, he gets blinded, he gets knocked down. Like everything I was reading was like, these people who don't see the way, who are in pain, God puts on mission for purpose and for meaning. And that was the thing I had not had my entire life. And so it was in response to that call where I become class chaplain, see you at the pole, speak at nursing homes, become a youth minister a year after becoming a Christian, meet a missionary who had been to Africa. He takes me to Honduras and Africa that same year. And like the context of material poverty and pain and who I was and where I'd came from just gelled. And I thought, this is what I need to do. This is my story in Scripture, in the ongoing tale in the book of life. This is what I need to do and what I need to follow. Spent another summer in northern Uganda at refugee camps. Got shot at by a militia and thought, I really want to move here now.
That's always fun.
Yeah. It's tells you a bit of the way my brain works. And then my girlfriend at the time met me in Kenya for the last half of the trip, and I proposed to her there. She said yes, and my wife, 18 and a half years, Grace. So we I finished my master's degree and we moved to Togo in West Africa to be missionaries to join a team there who was leaving. They'd been there for a decade. They had 35 churches. And what they recognized was that in planting the churches were essentially reliant on the missionaries for theological understanding, financial means, for propagation, and for governance. And so I was joining the team, having been mentored by a missionary whose expertise was on these, what he called the four selves. There's three selves in missions, but the fourth self was his self-theologizing when he focused on. And so we joined to do that, which works for a kid who's always been too independent. I'll do it myself, newspaper under the high chair type baby. It was like the perfect spiritual calling for me. It was, help people be self-reliant. That's what I did.
So what your conversion, of course, is we're all a miracle, but that's a very, very miracle-filled kind of story and a beautiful thing to hear. And then you go to a very traditional mission setting. Westerner goes in, does all the work, creates a dependency. You're thrown in the middle of that, but somehow in that you saw something different. What changed? I know that, as you started moving into what became Water4, what changed and how did you get there?
Man, I think like one of the benefits this has as Christians, I read the Bible for the first time on my own, not having gone to Sunday school or not having gone to like Sunday service. And then when we got into missions context, like I didn't have a lot of baggage of what it should have looked like. And so, I mean, the Lord spared me with great ignorance, which I guess he continues to do today. But it was, I didn't want to rely on anybody, like I didn't like the idea of I didn't like having to get paid by people in the church for me to be a missionary. So I was a terrible fundraiser because I didn't want to ask for money. So we made $19,000 a year before taxes, And so when we went in to do good in communities, we just didn't have the money to help people with. Like we didn't have, like, scarcity is the first law of economics, good, great Thomas Sowell quote. And we couldn't ignore it like most politicians do. We wanted to, bring water or help people's incomes increase. We just couldn't use outside money to do it because we didn't have it. So when we got involved in drilling, we built local materials with local stuff, scrap yards and welded it up. And when we were doing job training, it was like, how much money do you guys have? I can give you a loan for $200, but you got to pay it back because I got to pay my power bill myself. And so I think the real economy that happened in our missions context by not having a lot of funding, from coming from context of scarcity and poverty as a kid, God used all that to create a very different looking format. And I'll give credit to my missions team who I joined, who essentially said, we learned this after 10 years. We need to leave. And, having the blessing of that group who had put in a lot of hard work say, this is the type of fix that we need.
So basically, as you're thrown into missions, I love the fact that you went in a sense, not really knowing anything, which is a great place to be. I've watched myself. I was in the pastorate before I went to missionary training school, before I had a theological degree. And after I got all that stuff, it took me a while to unlearn before I could get back to relying on God. Sound like you got to skip that step, or maybe put it in a different order?
Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe just the knuckleheadedness. I had a master's in missiology, but like when it came down to just interacting with people, I had default behaviors that overrode any of the academic stuff. So it was later on when we really started to get successful that missions training started to become a problem for me. When I started to think too much about what we were doing and build programs and like do holistic work and community-based asset transformational development, yada, yada, yada. That's when everything went sideways. But early on, the early years, it was just, it was, clutch the flywheel. There was just no space for anything but reality. And we spent a lot of time in villages, camped 3 weeks at a time on the ground, and built a philosophy from there. My later story is messing everything up by thinking about it too much with academia, but in the short term, I think we were doing it right.
I've got a really close friend who I met in Indonesia years ago, and he actually worked at several companies in China for a total of about 30, 35 years. But his definition of business as mission kind of jives with what you're just saying. He says it's just walking with Jesus in business. When
Yeah.
we start making it more than that, we really start messing it up. And Jesus well, not kind of, he was extremely clear. When you abide in me, you bear fruit. Apart from me, you can't do anything. So the lesson is pretty obvious. Abide in me, lean on me, rest in me. So, all right. So Water4, what does it do? What brought you to that? What are the main things that we need to know um, about this solution that God gave you? It's clearly not, given your history, what you just shared, it's not something you went to school and learned how to do. This is clearly something God gave you. So tell us about that.
Yeah, it's an exercise in problem solving. So this um, as I tell you what I'll do, I'll just start in saying like not having enough resources and knowing that we needed the resources from the people we were trying to serve is an essential part of mine and Water4's foundational philosophy from day one. You can't give this problem away. You can't subsidize this away. It's not good, even if you could. We can't do that. So what we currently do is we pipe water to the homes of rural and peri-urban customers in sub-Saharan Africa. We work in 4 countries and 5 regions. We'll have 1.1 million customers at the end of the year, 1,400 employees inside these 5 business units, all of which Water4 wholly owns, which is really unique. We'll generate $2 million in revenue from the sales of those water and those home connections that are sold to customers. And we take all that money as earned revenue and plow it back into the business to continue to expand our water points.
So just to be clear for our audience, basically what you're describing is a local water utility, in
Correct.
essence, a water company. And
Yep.
so and it's a for-profit business. This is
Correct.
not charity. This is not, hey, we're going to pipe you water for free. I know you tried some of that. Let me give you a water
Yeah.
filter. Let's dig a well. We've heard those stories before. They don't necessarily last. Once you stop pushing the flywheel, they kind of go away. But the Lord led you into this for-profit, quite large thing. Give us an idea of the scale. Just how big is it today?
Yeah, I say today, 850,000 customers, 1,284 employees. So as of today, which is a lot. It's big. And this is all pipe water, prepaid meters. Every point of sale is managed. And so, 15,000 points of sale that are managed. We have retail walk-up centers where people can come and buy the water. We distribute water to schools, hospitals. It's a big time water utility. When you approach it, if you come to one of the offices in country, it looks like you're at a mining company. So there's hard hats and vests and vehicles and fabrication. We build all the, if you go to our website, you'll see these metal buildings and water towers and taps and homes. We build all that internally at our own manufacturing facilities that is all nationally operated. And then those pieces of capital assets that are fabricated are then installed as a part of the water systems. And then the same company that built and installed the water system then operates and maintains those same water systems. So everything's designed with a lens for operations and maintenance and having a profitable business.
So clearly,
on the backside.
it's built to last. There's no question about it,
Yep.
and you've built it on solid business principles. And I've heard this question a lot in the world of business mission, that we've tended to concentrate on smaller businesses, and so
Yep.
for the fear that when they get large, we lose our sense of missionality, if you will. So you specifically have managed not only to keep your focus on spiritual transformation as well as societal transformation. But how have you done it? How have you done that while building a continuing to scale profitable company?
I think so. Back in 2015, my wife and I had done this method. So essentially, if you're familiar with disciple making movements or discovery Bible studies, we incorporated that into well drilling back when we were in Togo. And so when we get out of Togo, moved to the U.S. in 2013, Water4 hired me in 2011. They asked, at that time we're doing lots of different things, Evangel Cubes and Jesus videos, and there's sort of like all these different partnerships with different mission groups. And I said, if we're going to be successful, we need to have an SME vision where we're starting to scale these small to medium sized enterprises, really capture large portions of the market. This is going to be, a low margin, high volume business model just because of the context of poverty. I read a book by Paul Pollack called Out of Poverty, or Business Solutions Poverty, one of his 2 books. And it just really gave me a vision of needing to have a business big enough that inside an umbrella of a multinational, you could support high quality executives, high quality administrators, HR, you could get supply chains and leverage good cost. And so I had come into this thinking about scale. And it's at the time we were talking about a 2 billion person problem. Now they're talking about a 4 billion person problem. Half the world doesn't have water they can drink, anywhere near their house. We were always thinking about scale. So as we incorporated faith into the businesses that we were starting, this DBS methodology is participatory, voluntary, and it's inductive. So, employees that work at a company are invited to a Bible study to come hear scripture spoken or said literally out loud, and then are invited to say it back in their own words. And so you can say it back, and essentially it's like making sure you understood it, say it back in your own words. And then the group or the facilitator will ask, did he miss anything or she miss anything was added, anything additional that was put in that. The group kind of does that. And they go, great, now can I have a second person volunteer? And then a third person volunteer. And the group does that. And then at the end of it, there's 4 questions. What does it teach about God? The group answers. What does it teach about humanity? The group answers. What are you being called to obey inside of 7 days based on the scripture? People go through and answer. And then, God put anyone on your heart to share this with this week? People go around and answer. Okay, I'm going to write it down. So what happened, it was a leavening process in the businesses where for years, this was a discipleship process that happened between the leadership of the business and the business itself, voluntary, participatory, them and their families, them and their church or their communities. And then all of a sudden, really in 2020, I think when everything was shut down, people were more isolated, what we saw was a scaling happening. Suddenly the employees were going out and sharing this more and more with their customers who they're engaging with, especially as we begin to transition from boreholes and hand pumps to piped water, which is another story.
So Matt, there's so many questions I want to ask you, but one that I want to flip that same question. So you shared how you've weaved or woven, I'm never quite sure how to say that, how you've weaved in disciple making into the business. And you told me one time how many of these small groups have multiplied.
So we now have 30,000 Discovery Bible Study groups that are meeting on an ongoing basis because of a peer-to-peer relationship between the employees in the business and the customers themselves.
That for the listener, that is the paradigmatic victory for business's mission. It is getting it out of the so-called C-suite among the people. They carry it, they spread it, and it becomes, for lack of a better term, becomes viral. So this is very wonderful.
Well, there we go. Fireworks. Be excited. This is very different from like me as a CEO delivering a devotional to staff that they have to sit and passively listen to. So
like they care about.
And act like they care. So we do this internally. Actually, after this call, we have ours at 11:30 Central. We're going to do a DBS. And what I do is I facilitate the DBS as the CEO, but all I do is ask those questions. We've got a scripture that goes out weekly to everyone that's a part of our network through WhatsApp. So we're all going to look at the same scripture. And then I'm just going to ask people those questions and let them all talk instead of me talking. And so what happens is you have a super empowered staff, an employee base that are going out as trenchers, as salespeople, as water quality testers, administrators. And then they have just told everyone that week that I'm going to share this with Mike because I think Mike really needs to hear this story today. And then next week when we get back and we take our prayer request, the facilitator wrote down that Matt was going to talk to Mike about it. And so then the facilitator asked, did anything happen there? God put Mike on your heart? Was there anything behind it? Can we pray for that? And so this really starts, an exciting process. And you see people who are not yet Christians out sharing the stories of God with other people who are not yet Christians, and getting the discipleship and an evangelistic process put before conversion instead of after, which is typically the way we do it. which creates a lot of movement, a lot of community, and a lot of good.
So it's had. I mean, it's clearly a great illustration of the multiplication principle. So my flip to that is, okay, you've got this weaved in. It's growing. 30,000 groups, which is probably at least 150,000 people, maybe twice that.
So we've got 158,000 people reporting in, and so our impact is estimated over 300,000 weekly inside those processes. Sort of like, who do you count? You count Christians as a third of people who attend church on Sunday, or is it
yeah,
100% that profess? But we know we've got 158,000 practicing it. Those are the people reporting in every week. But our group size typically is around 10, and so you can just extrapolate that out to around 300.
Well, so the question that is that, okay, you've got that part of it. I won't say you've got it down, but God's clearly blessing it. It's multiplying. It's impacting lives. What does that do in terms of trying just to build a scalable, profitable business? That's the other great challenge, right?
I mean, what we found is that, one, if you as a leader are living a virtuous, life in the pursuit of holiness, it's really good because your whole staff know that this is what you're leading out, understand your values, understand your beliefs, but also trickles that down to everyone else within the company, where everyone else is reading scriptures, knowing that they're to obey, these truths that are coming from scripture. They're doing that at a voluntary basis. They're doing that on a participatory basis. They're doing that, through obedience. What we found is we have water utilities. When I started drilling, man, it was rough. I mean, you got construction guys staying a couple weeks at a time in the villages, and you got lots of little Matt Juniors, left behind, and they're getting drunk every night. And people would bring a 5-gallon bucket full of beer out to my drill site, for lunch, and there's only 6 guys out there. And so, you're trying to manage pretty roughneck, environment. And this process changes the hearts of those people into individuals that see themselves as servants of God in communities, and people who are bringing love to those communities, and people that are sharing stories of gospel in those communities. So it's changed the way that the struggles we have, as compared to most companies with corruption or conflict and those sort of things, are, I think, greatly diminished because of this. And it enhances the perspective the community has with us, no matter what their faith is, because we're not coming in with bullhorns and, big, loudspeakers and things. We're coming in with just individuals walking house to house. And then if God puts someone on their heart, whether you believe that or not, if someone comes to you and says, I think God wants me to share this story with you about love, or about forgiveness or about acceptance, can I share it with you? It's pretty benign. And then the person who shares it with you only asks, does that mean anything to you? Does it teach anything about God, humanity? Do you think God's asking you to obey anything in that? Is there somebody you should share with? This is most non-coercive process that you can be a part of. And so, it's just been really healthy. It's created a lot of health. We have staff that are not Christians who participate in these on a voluntary basis because they feel like it's a great community building process for them. And even on their own journey of faith, they recognize the value of these scriptures. And leaders that aren't Christians who are even a part of that. And so it's been huge. It's not been an issue for us in terms of complexity, like I think everyone thinks it would be. It's been a value enhancer and strength to us.
So it's a beautiful illustration to me when I look at the Great Commission, or at least the Matthew version of it. Literally, it doesn't say go. It says, as you're in the process of going, make disciples, right? And that's what you're doing. I mean, it's meant to be, I won't say simple, but it is meant to be. No, actually, I do mean simple. I don't mean easy, but it is meant to be simple. It's not meant to be some convoluted process. I love that the methodology that you guys have developed does not have that coercion built into it. It doesn't have I got to close the deal here. I've got to get you to pray the prayer or whatever. God is working through this process. So I guess so many questions I could ask you. In all of this, and I know now you're into a different place, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, but what's the biggest challenge or biggest obstacle that you faced thus far? And it can be any dimension, financially, culturally, keeping your missional focus, avoiding mission drift, whatever you would say, yeah, this is number one for me, at least in recent memory.
I think the two things that come to mind with that is one, just our lack of understanding of water. We had, like everyone else, bundled water as a health product, and we were solving for a health equation, which was make sure the wells are cheap and clean. But what we didn't realize is that water was a time product for the people who were using it. It was the 3 hours a day walk to the well. That was the first ranking value or lack of value proposition that a well would make. And so everyone in the space is focused on number of wells, or whether it's a solar pump or a hand pump. No one's thinking about the time it takes for an individual to walk from where they live to that water point. So you do a hand pump, you're somehow going to serve 1,000 people, which it physically can't, because it didn't produce enough water to do that. Or we're going to do a solar pump and put 4 taps out in front of it, and now it's piped water. It's not piped water. It's in a pipe, but it's just right in front of the pump. It's water in a pipe is not piped water. And people still have to walk to it and use their time to come fetch it and still wait in line. So it was just like we were thinking about Africa as if it was a different planet with somehow different people with different priorities than the rest of the known world is. And that was the biggest hindrance to us and I think being educated into thinking that somehow Africans they were more communal, so they would want community-owned things, and it's like, it turns out like no human wants to have to share something with someone that they didn't get to choose to share it with. Community is a thing that you choose to be a part of. When you don't choose to be a part of it, it ceases to function like that.
It sounds rather socialist when you put it that way.
It totally is. It totally is. Yeah, it's like, and we had been, the power of words. No one told us that's what we were agreeing to as we agreed to these perspectives. But it was essentially like there's an idyllic, pre-modern world here that we don't need to sully. And so we're going to do these solutions that allow people to live in this, idyllic state, which is actually really unsafe and wrecked with poverty and illness, and people are trapped wanting to move ahead. So that, I think that's like the biggest problem is the mindset in the charity space. I think of all the things that we conquered, that was the big challenge, is in our own minds, we'd accepted a view of Africa that is not the view from which I have learned from Africans that they would like to see the world.
So let's, and I love this, because I think about how many times we're going in, and we don't just do it in missions, we do it in business in general. I have a solution, I'm going to find a problem. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Find the problem, understand the real problem, right? Which in this case is surprising, I'll bet, to most of our listeners, that Africans would care, about private ownership.
Private property.
Which is a human thing. It's a God thing. And the other is that they would care about time. I mean, they've got all the time in the world. What do? They could do something much more productive than walking 3 hours to the well, that's for sure. But we our blinders, not just when it comes to Africa, it's just in life in general. And God led you to go back and say, okay, what's the real problem here? Therefore, what's the real value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, we were asking people to pay for low-cost hand pumps at first, and then people wouldn't pay for it. And so we're like trying to get a third of the cost up front, and then we'd ask people to pay for ongoing maintenance on it. We couldn't get people to pay $200 a year for a hand pump or $200 up front. So we wanted $200 to $300 up front, $200 a year, and we're going to try to finance these hand pumps over time. We designed our own pump, low-cost drilling technology, yada, 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 and we were just working hard to try to get it cheap enough and try to find the right value proposition for people. With piped water, we get $5,000 to $8,000 up front before we even come in, from the same demographic, from the same community. Because the value proposition, the job to be done of water was finally understood, where people are like, no, I'll pay, $100 deposit at my mud hut to have piped water in front of my house, because I'm going to turn it into a micro business. I'm going to save 3 hours a day. I don't have to wait on anyone else. No one else is going to block me from getting it anymore. And I could move on with a million other things that I need to deal with today other than that. And when I was a missionary, people told me that Americans have watches, Africans have time. And it's like such a stupid thing. It's like like people are trapped in these inefficiencies, not because it's a choice or some sort of cultural value. It's just we've not innovated through business solutions to give people their time back. And when a woman or girl starts carrying water from 6 to 65, that's 16 years of daylight hours that are lost hauling water over the course of her life.
Yeah.
And when half a population gets 16 years back, in daily increments of 3 hours a day, things begin to change really fast. And so what people pay from us when they buy the water from this company, you're paying, less than a penny a gallon. But what they're really buying is time. They're buying time and labor of hauling it. And then the water is sort of a secondary product to that. It's not that the water's not important. It's clean. It's triple treated, purified. But really interesting for me as a missionary to realize that needed to take people at their word, needed to see them as I see the people around me in my context, and then ask myself what problems did they face to get them from where they are to where they'd like to be, which turns out everyone would like to be in a life a lot like the one that we're living today.
So your story, it's interesting, Matt, your story to me reads a little bit like an Ayn Rand novel in that you're really taking on the one hand, you're taking I would say purely, nothing's pure, but as pure as I've seen it, a purely capitalist approach to it, in that you've discovered the real need, you're meeting the real need, you're charging market rates.
Yep.
You're selling value here. You're getting money in return. You're making money. And you somehow, I don't think Ayn Rand would have gone here, but you're taking this pretty pristine form of capitalism and putting it into the world that the mission community has filled with a Christian veneer over socialism. Let's all just get together, help each other, and that'll work. And it hasn't worked. So what you're doing is working, and you've managed to weave in disciple making without losing your way on either side. How did you do that? What is it that made that possible?
I mean, the Lord did it. I mean, it was like us making a million wrong decisions and spending a lot of donor dollars to figure out a solution where we're at. Like currently, last year, 60% of the infrastructure was still grant funded, but 40% of it was financed through sales. And within 6 years, we should have a fully financeable model where we can take full investment and repay investment, use charity to de-risk new markets, go to new countries, expand. So we're not like at a pure business yet, but gosh, we're on the up and to the right trajectory is there. Our customers buy 2 times more in their second year than their first year because we're getting people time back and their incomes are going up. So we're building businesses with the intent to take on fully private investment for the whole thing. Why? Because half the planet doesn't have clean water. And there's not enough charity or government subsidy to scratch the surface of what needs to be done. So it's just, to me, it's really a logical, pragmatic decision where too many people are dying and suffering to use good intentions and altruism to do something about it. And the only thing that's ever built an economy, or the only thing that's ever historically eradicated poverty, is free market capitalistic approaches. It's what lifted us, has lifted, it's well over 1 billion people out of poverty, since the 1960s. And if you look at World Bank funding or read anything by Bill Easterly, you can see that when foreign aid enters an economy, the GDP declines rather than increases. And so an aid-based approach that's redistributing cash from one place to another place doesn't create market forces that can continue to leverage local assets and resources in productive ways. So they're consumed and then they're done. What happens in free markets is that the intuition of a customer that a product or service will solve their problem engages in a transaction, and the desire for the business providing the product or service to increase their profits engages in an incentive to iterate quickly to further solve that problem, giving more value to the customer. And the millions of cycles of that purchasing process that happen quickly and rapidly drive business-based innovations to solve problems with high levels of efficiency and high levels of impact. You can't do that with foreign aid and government because the incentive's not there to solve the problem that puts you as a charity out of business or government out of business. And then the feedback mechanisms of the P&L aren't there where you give the thing. There's no need for it to work so that you get your salary next week. You all get paid regardless of whether it works. And so there's just all these things that we've just come to see in market laws that aren't there. So
So in short, really, what you've done is you've operated. This is a kingdom principle. You've operated with the flywheel of putting the things in play, of thought, of action, of value creation. This is a flywheel effect, to steal the term from Jim Collins. That once it's up and running, it actually does continue for quite some time. It is the motor that runs the world, right? But and this will be my last question for today. We got to talk more, but obviously, I agree with what you're saying. I think theologically we're in a pretty close alignment. Economically, philosophically, we're coming from very much the same place. So I'm agreeing with you, but I'm also imagining, as you're sharing this story, wait a minute, this is a truly for-profit uh, company that is charging people for a quote basic necessity of life instead of giving it to them. It wasn't driven by health needs; it was driven by something different. I mean, all of this, which makes sense to me, and I hope to our listeners. I have no doubt, Matt, you get a lot of people that disagree with you, that challenge you, that throw their hands up like, "Oh my stars, this is just pure greed and selfishness. You sound like Gordon Gekko from Wall Street. I mean, what is wrong with you? How can you reconcile all of this with being a disciple of Jesus?" I'd love to have your answer to that, and then I'm going to give you the last word, and we'll sign off for today.
My preference would be called Redneck Seneca, if you want to do that instead, but instead of Gordon Gekko.
Can I use that as the
Sure,
title for
sure.
this episode?
With pleasure. Uh, it's like good intentions aren't enough. Like there literally is only 25% of the resources needed to address the current capital infrastructure needs for water from governments and charities combined. So you can you can use whatever altruistic concepts you want to use to, and create conversations about human rights or about equity and about inclusion and all that. At the end of the day, we're spending a lot of money on conferences to talk about those issues and not driving any solution that's changing the status quo for the poor, materially poor of the world. So I would just, it's the evidence. What I respond back with is show me some other better way than what we're doing, and I will gladly do it. I don't mind being wrong. I mind staying wrong. And so show me a better way. Show me a way that's providing this level, this quality of water to this demographic. 75% of our customers in northern Ghana earn less than 85 cents a day. That's not because we're exploiting them. It's because we're transforming their lives with this product of clean water. They have other water sources they could choose from. They choose ours because it gains a third of their day back. And that 85 cents quickly surpasses $1 in income. And once you get a little extra currency in your life, you can begin to make investments, make smarter decisions, actually hire out labor, and you can, see people's economy go up. So I usually just tell people, like, I understand everyone has good intentions that's in this, but can they find a better way? Can they show that to me? If they do, I'll do it.
Well, one of the authors that you and I both read a great deal of is Thomas Sowell, and his statement that most of the work we're doing in the world, certainly humanitarian work, the problem with it is that all they do is measure intention. We mean well, and they don't measure outcome. What actually happened? What good actually came out of it? And I think just that process alone would transform everything. If we started just looking at the outcome, as you say, show me a better way, show me something that gives a better outcome,
Yeah.
and I'll gladly look at it. But if you just keep telling me you mean well, that doesn't work.
Water is a human right. Okay, well, it's a right in the ground. There's a cost to convey it. Like, what are we going to do about the cost to convey it and treat it? And so it's like, yeah, okay, it's a right. Great. We're going to charge not for water. We're charging for the conveyance of water because somebody has to pay for it.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I think I try to give people credit for, the intentions are good, but the way that we've been taught in academia and in international development is a way that is built to self-perpetuate the institutions and systems that continue to redistribute money, rather than to try to actually solve the problems or have a vision for people solving their own problems, through their own decisions and minds.
Okay. So you get the last word. At least the last word for this episode. You will be back. For the listener, right. Believe me, Matt will be back if I can prevail upon him to give us more of his time.
Okay, I'll give you a Seneca quote. So Seneca says, he who bears the burden is stronger than the burden. So it's this vision of the poor that are going through daily lives of struggle actually have the capacity within themselves to struggle and to push forward for their own solutions. So the best type of charity, I say, is a charity that equips a person to never need it again. And so if we're going to be generous and compassionate and serve the poor, remember that they're strong people who've been bearing burdens their whole lives at a magnitude beyond our own. And then have a vision for the way that you help them to not require your help anymore.
Which is an amazing transformation, again, of how we view people. We view them as weak and needy and helpless, and therefore, this is not about race. It's about who's stronger, who thinks they're stronger, helping the weaker. And this is not what we're talking about at all. It's recognizing their inherent strength and unleashing that to address their own problems. And not only that, but to prosper, to flourish, to take it to a positive place further than we could have imagined.
Yeah, absolutely. It was the people who have looked me in the eyes and seen more than I could see of myself that changed my lives. So do that in the way that we serve others.
Beautiful. Matt, thanks for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Matt Hangen from Water4, water, the word water, and the number 4. Check out his website, water4.org. Lots to read there, lots to see there, and start becoming connected with what they're doing. Not just in Africa through Water4, but think about some other lessons you could learn from this, and multiply this effect not only through the Bible studies, the discovery studies you guys are doing, but around the world as well. So, Matt, thanks again so much for being with us.
Thanks, Mike.